welcome to another edition of The Locker Room, where the BS stops and the analysis starts. I'm one of your three hosts tonight, Kyle Anderson, and joining me as always,
it's Brandon Jones, live in the locker room.
And Matt Hirsch, right here in the locker room.
And once again, we're going to dive into some of the subjects that's going on in the world of sports and make sure that not only we give you expert analysis, but also give you our opinion, and if you disagree, well, the hell with you. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and start off because the big stories that have been going on, we're going to talk about the NFL tonight, but we're also going to talk about college football. We just wrapped up the 5th week of college football. A lot of big things have happened, and we're going to go back on some of our predictions and see where we stand and what's transpired.
Go back. That's exactly what I think I want to do.
Yeah, because a lot of them were kind of bad. But the big one we're going to talk about is, and I'll go ahead and throw this out to you guys, after week 5, we've had a lot of shocking games. We've had some people come out of the gates that are not very good. The big question we asked online was, which college football coach, as it stands right now, do you think will probably be fired at the end of the year? Brandon, I'll go ahead and start with you first.
Let me take Joker Phillips for 500, Alex.
Now, people that don't know, Kentucky started out bad. I mean, I thought at least Kentucky would be 2-2 by now. What is their record, Matt? They're what? They won one game. I know that.
Yeah, I think they won. They've won one, and it was
Kent State.
Yeah.
Now,
and they struggled with that one.
Yeah.
Now the other person, it seems like a lot of the coaches are going to get fired. Maybe in the SEC. There's some people now. We know for a fact John L. Smith will not be there next year. There's just no hiding that. I mean, Arkansas is horrible.
Smile.
Some of the people have seemed to think that Gene Chizik could actually be on that list. I'll ask you guys, what do you think? Matt?
Well, you kind of stole mine with John L. Smith. You know, that's kind of the obvious right there. Of course, we got, Joker Phillips. Derek Dooley started out pretty well this year, but, that seat keeps getting hotter because it doesn't matter how you look, he's not winning ball games. Tennessee looks a lot better than they did last year, but they're still not getting, marks in the W column. That's just not working for him.
Does Gene Chizik get fired? The next 2 weeks are critical for Gene Chizik. The Arkansas game is critical. And I know Arkansas was struggling, but Arkansas can put up yards and put up points. And I don't care what people said about that Auburn-LSU game. LSU played a conservative game. You'll see more about the Auburn defense Saturday. If he comes out and he loses to Arkansas, and I already think that they lose to Ole Miss, you still got Alabama, you still got Georgia, and you got to go to Vanderbilt. And I know Vanderbilt was having a hard time, but you got to go to Vanderbilt that South Carolina only went up there and won by 3. You lose the next 2, and you got 4, maybe 5 more losses on top of the 3 that you already have. That's an 8-loss season. 8 losses, they might force them out.
Well, here's the other question is that there are some coaches that you have to look at that are they going to be forced out, or are they going to finally realize, hey, the grass is greener elsewhere, and they'll see the writing on the wall? Like, will Chizik try to jump ship and go somewhere else? I don't know about if Chizik would really do that or not, but I could definitely see that happening for Franklin at Vanderbilt. He's a hot commodity, even though Vanderbilt's not really won much this year. They haven't won an SEC game. Doesn't really look like they might win an SEC game except Kentucky. And then, Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen's still having a good year, probably the best year he's had at Mississippi State. Now might be the time for him to find something else before he loses to Ole Miss.
Which team right now, we'll start in the SEC, do you think is probably the most overrated? That we heard all these things about, and we've seen them play, and you're just looking at them saying, I don't see it. I don't know where this is coming from.
That's another tough question as far as overrated, because I think the logical answer would be Arkansas, just because they've been very underwhelming. They have a ton of talent, but they just can't win ball games. I think that's more coaching, not as much talent. I'm going to say Georgia. I really think that Georgia right now I think they're ranked 5th in the nation. They let Tennessee score how many points against them?
44.
44. That's they still got a lot to prove. I think Aaron Murray showed that he's vulnerable. He's a great quarterback, but he's shown that he can be rattled by a subpar defense, a mediocre SEC defense at best. So I think Georgia's probably a little bit overrated right now.
Brandon, who do you think is most overrated?
I gotta go down with Mississippi State. Mississippi State is undefeated right now. I think they're ranked 20th in the country. Your wins have come against Jackson State, South Alabama. You struggled to beat Troy, and an Auburn team that can't move the ball against a 3A Alabama high school football team. Those are your wins. You really hadn't played anyone. And the Troy, the thing that's alarming to me, that the game against Troy, you gave up over 500 yards of offense. You should have been beaten then. Troy made some mistakes, and South Alabama put up over 400 yards of offense.
Troy's middle of the road Sun Belt team. They're a good football team, but they're not at the top of that league.
No.
Anyway.
No.
I think I'm going to cast my vote for LSU, and the only reason I'm going to say LSU is for this reason. I know a lot of people are going to say, "Well, you can't say one game." It's not just one game. Last week against Townsend, I mean, you let Townsend score 22 points and even take the lead on you. A lot of it, I think, is they still have an amazing defensive line. They've got some great linebackers. Secondary's a little shaky, but they're still very good. On offense, they have the same problem they did last year. You've got a quarterback that you really can't lean on, and where it's worse than last year, if Lee messed up, you had Jefferson. If Jefferson messed up, you had Lee. Mettenberger, that's it. You've got Bolden behind him, and people really don't feel comfortable with him going in there. And then their offensive line is not – they got guys that are hurt.
I think that's really the thing with LSU, and I know that's kind of yours, but I wanted to jump in with LSU, is I don't know if they're holding something back. I know they're missing some continuity on the offensive line. I think it's evident they're missing a lot of leadership on that team. I think they're loaded with talent, but they look a lot to me like that Alabama 2010 team. That there's a ton of talent, just not a lot of leaders. Mettenberger hasn't really stepped up as a leader in the huddle. Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu not being there. I know that people think he was super talented. He wasn't that talented. He was great on special teams, but he was a vocal leader on that team, and I think that's what they're really missing right now.
And right on it. He was the emotional leader. He got that team riled up. He made the big plays when they needed to be made. He got everyone fired up, and when you're missing that spark plug,
he was the face that program needed.
Yeah. When you're missing that spark plug, and the thing about it is, you can have a terrible quarterback, but if he got some wheels, it kind of it's the deodorant that masks a lot of funk. But when you're not playing well and you run a forever, yeah, now we got some problems, because now if the pass ain't there, you pull it down. What is that? A 2-yard loss? It's gonna take you about 30 minutes just to get that. So I mean, they're struggling right now.
Now, with the rest of college football outside of the SEC, who jumps out at you that it was like everybody had real high aspirations for them, and you look at it and go, they just have really fallen short. They're way overrated.
Hokey High, Tech, VPI, Olara, Polytech, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech.
I've got to agree with that. They've really struggled. They've really come up short. A couple of others just to kind of spread the wealth, I guess, across the country. It's hard to say that they've underperformed, but man, there's a lot of parity in that Pac-12 this year. A lot more than I think we maybe have even anticipated.
Yeah.
We thought USC was going to be strong. I think we said in our preview show USC's front 22 was as good as anybody in America. I don't think we realized just how soon it was going to bite them in the rear end, the fact that they didn't have depth.
Yeah.
Another one out of the Pac-12, Stanford. Stanford has, they've lost to Washington. They've struggled with a few games. They're a solid football team, but you can tell they're a couple of years removed from Jim Harbaugh. It's starting to really show for me.
Yeah.
So they're in for maybe a longer year than we thought.
I think the thing with Stanford, I'm impressed by them. Stanford in the trenches is awesome. Their front seven on defense, their offensive line, their defensive line, they're awesome. The problem is if they can't run the ball, they don't have a lot of speed out on the outsides, and that's going to hurt you in the Pac-12. Lane Kiffin played right into their hands, and you're not going to see teams do that. So Stanford, was a pleasant surprise to see them beat USC. But I mean, I tell you, the team that I thought would do more, and that's not doing it, it's Clemson. Clemson's one of those teams. You look at that Auburn win, it doesn't look all that impressive. You go up to Boston College and you barely beat them, and we know how Boston's college has been the last few years. So Clemson is one of those teams that I got to put right up there. And
the only loss they have is to an undefeated Florida State team that people are saying might still be in the national championship hunt. So it's tough to really pick on Clemson. I can see what you're saying. I wanted to say Clemson a second ago, but I've got to tell you, it's hard to really say them because it's still way early. They could still really achieve. Another one, actually, from the ACC, Georgia Tech.
Oh, yeah.
Georgia Tech. I thought they would be a lot better. Of course, they could still wind up winning some games that you would think they shouldn't win, like Clemson or somebody like that.
And I tell you somebody else that I'm impressed with, TCU. We talked about how TCU is going to do in the Big 12 and TCU, and I think Tony Barnhart said this, TCU is going to force teams in the Big 12 to play a style of play that they don't want to play.
Well, they're the only team in the Big 12 that plays defense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious after Texas let Ole Miss score 31 points, after West Virginia and Baylor played a basketball game in football uniforms.
Yeah.
I think that it's obvious that TCU might have a leg up just by the fact that they play defense in that league.
Yeah.
Now, who do you guys think, and we'll start in the SEC, is the most underrated team that's not getting a lot of attention or respect, and they really do deserve it? Is there anybody in the SEC right now?
In the SEC, I'd probably say South Carolina. They might not be flashy, which is, people might judge that because it is a Steve Spurrier team. But if you look at the most successful Steve Spurrier teams in the past, like that 96 Florida team, they weren't flashy, just Danny Werfel got it done and they played defense. Well, that looks a lot like the South Carolina team, where they have a they have a great running game, solid quarterback situation. Even if they have a hurt quarterback, they've got a quarterback that has proven he can come in and fill in pretty decently. Connor Shaw had the game of his life here a few weeks ago, where he was 20 for 21.
Yeah.
Reminds me of a terrible day where Stephen Garcia just ripped Alabama.
Yeah.
And they've got a great defense. I'm not going to say great defense, a solid defense. There's that Georgia game coming up that's going to decide it. I think that really is going to decide it this weekend.
I'll say it. They have a great defense. Top 10 in the country right now. Jadeveon Clowney. The defensive line is getting it done. Secondary is coming along. But we're talking about underrated. I got to go with Florida because people are already talking about the Georgia and South Carolina game about the winner taking the East. People are leaving Florida out of the equation. And Florida was, we talked about Muschamp maybe being on the hot seat, maybe getting a little warm this summer. Florida is one of those teams that's underrated. And I go to the West, Texas A&M. I think everyone was pleasantly surprised how physical Texas A&M has come out in the early part of the season, and the way that defensive line, the defense is playing. So I think Texas A&M out of the West.
I'm going to go ahead and say Ole Miss. I think ever since the first game, when they were down at halftime and they came out and just took over, they have just steadily gotten better. And I think a lot of people look at the loss to Texas, where they lost 66-31. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, Ole Miss is not good. After watching the Alabama game, they're playing a lot tougher. Their offense is very fast-paced. I think that they probably will at least get to 7 wins. I think they're going to go to a bowl game. I would say that right now the Egg Bowl is actually going to look like it's going to be a good game and actually may be competitive for the first time in a while.
Right.
And that game is back on Thursday night, right?
I think it is back on Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving night. That'll be a great game. The thing with Ole Miss is I don't know if they're there yet. They still lack a little speed. They still lack a little talent. They still lack a little depth. But I think that Hugh Freeze is the right guy for the job. And the reason I say that is that they don't quit. They have not, they could have totally just, laid down versus Texas. But they kept trying. They kept scoring points. Scored 31 points. Just Texas scored, 66? So they don't quit. They play till the final whistle, and that's the attitude that team really needs right now, and that's the attitude that fan base needs right now.
Now, who is the most underrated football team outside of the SEC in college football in the different conferences? Is there one team that jumps out at you guys that really makes you think, hey, look, this team really deserves something to be said about them, and they're kind of glossed over a little bit?
I got 3 right now.
Yeah, I got a couple
that come to mind. That comes to mind. There's a few of them. First one is
out west, I think.
Yeah. The first one's probably going to be, for me, is probably going to be a lot of teams in that Pac-12, man. Oregon State.
Yeah, that was one of mine. Absolutely.
Washington.
That was the other one of mine. Those were the 2 that really jumped out at me.
Yeah, Oregon State, Washington, and UCLA. UCLA might get about 7 or 8 wins, but they're not supposed to. He's playing a ton of freshmen, and the thing that got people excited about UCLA right now is they're doing it with young players, and he's recruiting. So it looks like that USC-UCLA game is going to go back to meaning something. And coming back to the East Coast, Louisiana Tech, Kansas State with Colin Klein, TCU is another team, and in Louisville, and Rutgers.
Louisville's a good one because this is the first 5-0 start that they've had in a while, in a long time. So it's good to see that Charlie Strong has brought them back to where they wanted to be. The 3 Pac-12 teams, that was exactly where I was going to go. I agree with that totally. Top to bottom, they might be the best conference in America right now. Man. Just they're strong all the way down. Another one, I can't really pick a team. I'd like to do a conference right here.
Sure.
I think the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is probably the most legitimate mid-major conference in America right now. You look at Western Kentucky has, even though they lost to Alabama pretty big, they played a pretty tough game versus the number 1 team in America. Then they turn around, beat Kentucky. An in-state, I don't want to say an in-state rival, but the big in-state school, they shock them. Troy played Mississippi State to the wire.
Should have beat them.
Louisiana Monroe has beaten Arkansas and should have beaten Auburn. I mean, they took Auburn to overtime.
Middle Tennessee State.
Middle Tennessee State's having a good year. They beat Georgia Tech. You look at Louisiana Lafayette is still looking great. That's Sun Belt. That's they're giant killers. That entire conference.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be impressed with the Sun Belt. We would laugh and joke about the Sun Belt even last year, and it even started this year. Middle Tennessee State started off with a loss to McNeese State, and the jokes about the Sun Belt were rampant. They had another FCS loss. I'm not sure who that was. But we always talk about the games that they lose to the FCS opponents. But the Sun Belt's come out this year, and it has surpassed some of the other conferences. So I'm very impressed with the Sun Belt.
Well, and the thing about the Sun Belt, as everybody is saying, I mean, they're stepping their game up, and they're basically telling anybody that plays them, look, we're not a rollover, we're not your homecoming team. And it looks like more and more like Conference USA is starting to become that way. So it's a good thing that they are bringing in La Tech and they are bringing in, Florida
and that's
National.
The thing, you'd think, mid-major, one of those, the conferences that you think about are the MAC and the Conference USA. The Sun Belt is legitimate.
Well, that pretty much wraps up this segment of the college football. When we come back, we're going to discuss the NFL, the replacement refs, and why Brandon says that Roger Goodell should be a porn star. This is The Locker Room. Come on back with us.
this could be the best